Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Michigan in Dearborn, a Phi Beta Kappa graduate from Dartmouth College. Dr. New received a master's degree in statistics and a doctorate in political science from Stanford University. Before coming to Michigan, he worked as a postdoctoral researcher at the Harvard-MIT Data Center and later taught at the University of Alabama. Dr. New researches and writes about the social science of pro-life issues. His study, Pro-Life Legislation, was recently published by State Politics and Policy Quarterly. Today, Dr. New will address Promises Unkept. Dr. New?
Very pleased to have an opportunity to address this press conference. Before I begin, a quick commercial. I'm an adjunct scholar at a brand new pro-life think tank, the Charlotte Lozier Institute. We're the education and research arm of the Susan B. Anthony List, and we've assembled a top-flight group of social scientists, public health scholars, and bioethicists who will be providing informative commentary from a pro-life perspective on abortion and other sanctity of life issues. I'm very excited to be a new part of this exciting pro-life endeavor. I can do a lot of presentations on pro-life issues to a lot of different audiences. So I have different kinds of presentations. That when I'm at press conferences, I know that media always like to be entertained. So I have a fun version of the presentation I give at press conferences. Here in Washington, D.C., I notice people are very serious about everything, so I have a serious version for when I'm in Washington. But here I find myself at a Washington, D.C. press conference, so I think we'll talk this both fun and serious. So I hope I can pull this off today. I want to begin my talk by giving a couple quotes from abortion proponents back from the 1970s. The first was from actually NARAL, a debating handbook they published. A policy that makes contraception and abortion freely available will greatly reduce the number of unwanted children and thereby curb the tragic rise of child abuse in our country. Another quote bottom is from Larry Lader, who was a big fan of zero population growth and helped found NARAL. And he stated in 1974, the impact of the abortion revolution may be too vast to assist immediately. It should usher an era where every child be wanted, loved, and properly cared for. Now, this is interesting for two reasons. First off, back in the 60s and 70s, lots of people who advocated for abortion talked this way. They really argued that abortion would help society in all kinds of different ways. And this was actually pretty common. Most abortion proponents today talk about women's autonomy and women's liberty, but these kind of arguments were actually pretty common back in the 1970s. The second thing you'll notice is the date of these quotes. They're both from the 70s. Why? Because there's just a vast body of evidence and a vast body of research that shows these claims have not been borne out, that abortion, in fact, didn't help society. It's hurt society in countless ways. So I want to talk about three things today. My time is limited, but I can cover them all. First is how abortion failed to lower out-of-wedlock birth rates. Second is how abortion failed to lower child abuse. And third, how abortion failed to lower crime. So I want to talk about out-of-wedlock birth rates. And the argument they made at the time was clear, that if you legalize abortion, sexually active single women would be able to terminate their pregnancies, and therefore you'd have fewer out-of-wedlock births. And that, at least in theory, makes some sense, but it didn't work out that way in the real world because abortion changed sexual mores. After Roe v. Wade, people became more likely to engage in premarital sex. People became less careful about using contraception. Taboos regarding sex before marriage weakened, and conceptions increased dramatically by about 30% after Roe v. Wade. Now, a higher percentage of these conceptions, unfortunately, were aborted, but the out-of-wedlock birth rate still continued to climb. And this chart shows it very nicely, that you see the out-of-wedlock birth rate being the red line. It continues to go throughout the 60s. We hit 70, 73, and it barely wobbles. It keeps its increase. So again, the evidence is just very clear that abortion certainly, or legal abortion, certainly didn't do much or did anything to reduce the percentage of births that were out of wedlock. So I think that's one myth we can certainly discredit. Second thing that abortion proponents claimed back in the 70s was that abortion would lower child abuse. And again, the argument they made was that wanted children would be less likely to be abused than unwanted children. And again, logically, that may make a bit of sense, but again, it failed in practice for several reasons. First, a high percentage of child abuse does occur against children who are wanted. There was a USC study, which is very thorough, which pointed that out. Abortion also, as we saw earlier, did not reduce the out-of-wedlock birth rate, and there's evidence that children born out of wedlock are more likely to suffer from child abuse than children born raised by both of their biological parents. And third, women who obtain abortions, there's research indicating they themselves are more likely to go ahead and abuse their own children. And again, there's also psychological reasons why abortion might lead to more child abuse. I don't have time to go into all these reasons in full, but permissive abortion may diminish the taboo against aggressing against the defenseless. Is to value children. It may have diminished the value for caring for children. This is all spelled out in my handout, but psychologically, psychologists have said that there are reasons why abortion might lead to more child abuse, and it has. Since 1973, child abuse has increased by over 1,000%. That's tenfold. Between 1973 and 1990, deaths due to child abuse increased by 400%. And again, this chart pretty nicely shows that child abuse basically continued to rise pretty sharply after 1973, and it just continued an upward trajectory. It seems pretty clear that the fact that abortion was legal and the fact that more abortions being performed didn't stop this trend. In fact, it may have even made it worse. You see a dramatic uptick in child abuse in the years after 1973. Last thing I want to talk about is abortion and crime. This argument actually gained a little bit of currency in 2001 with an article that appeared in the academic journal, the Quarterly Journal of Economics. Again, argument was straightforward. Legal abortion, in theory, would reduce the population of demographic groups likely to engage in crime. Now, this argument was never really embraced by people who support legal abortion because, quite frankly, you can see the eugenic implications this argument had, but it still seemed to gain some currency among the general public because it received a lot of media, and Stephen Levitt, who authored this study, wrote the popular book Freakonomics, which went on to become a best-selling book. But there were some problems with the argument that scholars pointed out. I was very skeptical from the get-go. First, one thing they argue is that those states that did legalize abortion before Roe, New York, California, Washington, saw their crime rates go down. But what the scholars didn't really think much about, or didn't really hold constant, is the fact that a lot of people who got abortions in these states traveled from other states. And they didn't really consider that very carefully. They also claimed that states with high abortion rates, 70s and 80s, showed a bigger crime rate declines. But one thing they didn't account for is the fact people move around a lot. That just because someone is born or would have been born in a given state doesn't mean they're going to live there for the rest of their life. So it seemed a little bit fishy to me. But there's been some better criticisms out there, which I think are very compelling. They've looked at the demographics of crime. And if these scholars are correct, what you would see is that young people who, otherwise, many of whom were aborted away, the younger cohort should have been less likely to commit crimes. But the crime data shows the exact opposite. People born after Roe v. Wade actually became more likely to engage in acts of crime. And the charts are very clear that you look at the homicide rate amongst people aged 14 to 17, and it spikes up in the mid-90s. This, again, was a cohort of people born after Roe v. Wade. So, again, if the scholars are correct, you would see, again, young people engaging in less crime, but that's not the case. The cohort born after Roe v. Wade is quite honestly engaging in even more crime. Another chart shows a series of violent crimes by 12 to 17-year-olds. Again, if the argument that abortion reduces crime is correct, you should see this number go down as more abortions are performed. But that doesn't happen. You see that number spike up in 1993. That's a cohort of 12 to 17-year-olds that were all born after Roe v. Wade. So again, it doesn't appear that young people are less likely to commit crimes. They actually become more likely to commit crimes, which I think really turns that Levitt argument squarely on its head. So basically, to wrap up, there's really no empirical evidence that legal abortions benefit society as a whole. It's failed to reduce out-of-wedlock births, it's failed to reduce child abuse, and it's failed to reduce crime. People who advocated for legal abortion in the 1960s and 70s made a lot of promises. They promised us a better society, but I think the empirical evidence is very clear. The promises they made are all promises that were unkept. Thank you.